In a galaxy of empires, there was one species everyone misunderstood. Humanity rebuilt the worlds they conquered. They fed enemies who once bombed their cities. They signed peace treaties again and again and again. The Elendari Collective called them paradoxical. The Vask Dominion called them weak. Pirates called them prey. For 2 years, humanity responded to atrocity with law, to slavery with diplomacy, to cruelty with restraint, and the galaxy laughed. Until the day proof arrived, the day mercy ended, and the universe learned something no one had calculated. Human compassion is not instinct, it is a decision. And once that decision is revoked, there is nothing more dangerous in existence. The archives of the Elendari Collective were not stored in vaults. They were grown. Vast cathedral-like chambers of crystalline lattice stretched across their homeworld's equatorial megastructure. Within the transparent mineral structures flowed rivers of light, compressed histories of civilizations long extinct, species assimilated into greater polities, wars that had burned star clusters to ash. The Elendari did not conquer impulsively. They studied first. They categorized. They modeled. They predicted. Their psycho-historical frameworks had accurately projected the rise and fall of 1,842 interstellar civilizations with 94.7% predictive reliability. Humanity reduced that number. When humans first entered galactic awareness, the Elendari predicted a mid-tier expansionist power with moderate aggression potential and high diplomatic volatility. They were wrong. When humans fought their first border war against the Cathari expansion bloc, they did not annex the defeated systems. They rebuilt them. When a famine struck the border worlds of a rival polity, human agricultural fleets arrived before relief from the rival's own government. When pirates raided human trade lanes, human patrol ships disabled the pirate vessels, then transferred medical supplies to surviving crews. The Elendari analysts debated the anomaly. Strategic altruism, one proposed. Delayed conquest conditioning, another argued. Resource surplus distortion, suggested a third. But the deeper they studied humanity, the clearer it became. The compassion was not tactical, it was cultural. And culture, unlike tactics, could not be easily modeled. The Vask Dominion had evolved in a harsher stellar region. 3 neighboring species had competed for the same biosphere cluster. Only one remained. Dominion doctrine was simple. Dominance ensured survival. Compassion was permitted only when it reinforced authority. When human relief fleets began rebuilding former enemies' infrastructure after the Helian trade war, Dominion observers interpreted it as reputation management. When humans forgave wartime reparations, Dominion strategists logged it as weakness. When humans publicly condemned war crimes committed against them but refused retaliatory genocide, Dominion war colleges updated their threat assessment downward. Humanity, they concluded, lacked predatory instinct. That conclusion circulated. It reached places beyond imperial courts. It reached the fractured information webs of the Colrex cartel. The cartel was not an empire, it was an ecology. Clans, mercenary fleets, black market brokers, slave traders, arms dealers, loosely bound by profit motive. They did not hold territory in the traditional sense, they infested it. They thrived in the gaps between major powers. They observed patterns carefully, and they saw something in humanity no predator could ignore: restraint. Restraint implied hesitation. Hesitation implied exploitable latency. The cartel did not need to defeat humanity. They only needed to extract value before retaliation. They selected a target accordingly. New Carthage was not strategically important. That was precisely why it was vulnerable. A frontier agricultural world orbiting a stable G-type star, it existed primarily to feed three nearby systems. Wide continental plains shimmered with nutrient-dense crops engineered for high-yield export. Atmospheric processors maintained temperate climate bands across what had once been arid landmasses. The population was diverse, but predominantly human. Third-generation settlers, terraform engineers who had chosen permanence, families who believed distance from Earth meant safety. At 0314 Planetary Standard Time, orbital comm buoys registered interference. At 0315, they ceased transmission. At 0318, customs patrol ships attempting to investigate lost contact. At 0321, ionization trails appeared in upper atmosphere. The first drop pods struck the capital Arcology's defense grid generators. Simultaneously, stealth frigates emerged from masked positions beyond the moon's gravity shadow and deployed jamming satellites. It was not chaotic. It was precise. Cartel forces disabled infrastructure nodes with surgical efficiency. Within 6 hours, planetary coordination was severed. Within 12, organized resistance collapsed. The most chilling aspect was what did not happen. There was no indiscriminate bombing, no mass urban annihilation. The cartel required labor, not rubble. Human adults were restrained using adaptive magnetic binders calibrated to skeletal density. Children were separated and categorized. Digital identity matrices were copied. Skilled technicians were flagged. The first transport convoy departed before dawn. By the time neighboring systems detected irregularities and dispatched inquiry vessels, New Carthage was quiet. 1,200,000 humans were missing. The galaxy expected rage. They received procedure. Within 48 standard hours, the Human Interstellar Assembly submitted formal charges to the Elendari Collective Arbitration Council. Evidence packets were meticulously compiled. Orbital sensor logs, survivor testimonies, jamming signature analysis linking the attack to known Call-Rex transponder modifications. Human diplomats requested immediate sanction proceedings through the Orvathi Trade Compact. They petitioned for investigative access to suspected mining installations along the outer scar. They offered conditional amnesty to any cartel faction that released captives voluntarily. They opened back-channel negotiations through neutral intermediaries. They even authorized ransom funds, quietly, to avoid encouraging future kidnappings. The response from the Call-Rex cartel was a single encrypted broadcast. No assets matching your query. The Vask Dominion abstained during sanction votes. Their justification, insufficient proof of centralized cartel responsibility. Behind closed doors, Dominion strategists were curious. Would humanity mobilize fleets? Would they strike preemptively? Weeks passed, then months. Human trade continued. Human relief missions continued. Military mobilization remained at baseline levels. Galactic analysts downgraded crisis probability. Commentators labeled the event tragic but contained. The cartel interpreted the restraint as validation. Within the analytical spires of the Elendari homeworld, dedicated modeling clusters were reassigned to the human variable. They studied neurological scans obtained during cultural exchange programs. They examined human historical archives. They analyzed pre-spaceflight wars and post-scarcity conflicts alike. 3 patterns emerged with statistical clarity. First, protective absolutism. Human neurochemistry exhibited dramatic escalation responses when offspring were threatened. Hormonal cascades altered risk assessment, suppressing fear responses while amplifying aggression thresholds. Second, retributive justice. Human societies encoded justice not merely as legal structure, but as moral identity. Crimes unanswered destabilized social trust networks. Closure was not emotional preference, it was structural necessity. Third, threshold escalation. Humans tolerated sustained harm when they believed resolution remained possible. But when belief in resolution collapsed, escalation bypassed intermediate phases. It became decisive. The models attempted to predict when that collapse might occur. They failed to assign a reliable temporal marker. Human patience was elastic until it snapped. On Earth, the first anniversary of the New Carthage abductions was marked by global broadcast. Names scrolled across cityscapes. Families held photographs beneath projected constellations representing the missing. Human political factions argued fiercely in the early months. Hardliners demanded immediate military action. Moderates urged continued diplomacy. But something unexpected occurred as time passed. Division diminished, not because anger faded, because evidence accumulated. Each failed negotiation, each denied inspection request, each intercepted pirate transmission hinting at forced labor quotas. The grief did not dissipate, it crystallized. Military appropriations bills passed with overwhelming support. Fleet modernization programs accelerated quietly. Weapons platforms previously designated ethically prohibited except in existential conflict were reclassified as contingent defensive options. Training simulations updated parameters. Joint fleet exercises increased in frequency. No public declarations were made, but in secure military networks, a phrase began appearing in internal assessments: threshold proximity increasing. The data shard arrived without ceremony. It did not come through diplomatic channels. It did not pass through arbitration courts. It was intercepted by a human patrol corvette operating along the outer debris fields near the Veil Expanse. The vessel had been tracking anomalous micro-jump signatures, short, unstable bursts typically associated with smuggling craft attempting to mask travel vectors. The source was a damaged cartel courier ship. Its engines were failing. Its hull was fractured. Its crew was already dead. Internal scans showed no combat damage. The ship had torn itself apart, attempting an emergency micro-translation. Inside the debris field, drifting among fractured plating, the corvette's retrieval drones found a quantum-encoded storage pore shielded in layered signal-scrambling alloys. Standard encryption protocols failed. Human cryptographers forwarded the shard to Unified Command. Within 48 hours, the encryption was breached. The first analysts reviewing the contents requested psychological clearance before continuing. The second team did not. They continued. The shard contained operational logs from a Calrex mining installation designated Sector 47L. Cross-referenced coordinates placed it deep inside cartel territory, in a system previously flagged but never proven as a detention site. The logs were efficient, clinical, asset tallies, productivity charts, mortality rates. There were images, rows of restrained humans inside pressurized mining shafts, children classified under non-compliant labor projections, a section titled Liability Minimization, execution timestamps, biometric confirmations. There were no negotiations in the logs, no leverage strategies, no political bargaining entries. The humans were never bargaining chips. They were expendable labor, and once productivity declined, they were eliminated. The final entry in the shard read, "Population surplus neutralized to maintain efficiency ratios." When the footage reached Earth, no public broadcast followed, no emergency address. The families of New Carthage were not told immediately. The information moved upward, to the Human Interstellar Assembly, to Unified Fleet Command, to the Strategic Ethics Council. In a secured chamber beneath the Pacific Ocean's tectonic shield array, representatives gathered. No shouting filled the room. No dramatic declarations echoed. The silence was worse. One admiral requested confirmation. A second verification sweep confirmed authenticity at 99.998%. The remaining fraction accounted for theoretical unknown encryption manipulation. It was dismissed. The presiding civilian authority spoke only 3 words. Is negotiation viable? A pause. The intelligence director responded, no. That was the moment. The threshold did not shatter explosively. It settled into place. And then it locked.
Across human space, something subtle changed. Not publicly, not theatrically, but in tone. In civilian networks, discussion threads hardened. Political commentators who once urged patience now demanded consequence. Military academies canceled debate panels regarding proportionality frameworks. Recruitment rates spiked. Psychological studies conducted during the crisis had predicted fragmentation under prolonged trauma. Instead, unity metrics reached historic highs. The concept of collective trauma bonding, long theorized by Elendari sociologists, manifested with mathematical clarity. Humanity did not fracture under shared pain. It fused. In Dominion intelligence circles, analysts observed unusual fleet redistribution patterns. Human vessels were repositioning along trade corridors, but not clustering overtly. Logistics chains expanded quietly. Civilian industrial output shifted toward materials typically associated with warship construction. When Dominion observers presented these findings to their high strategos, the response was measured skepticism. They have been harmed before, the strategos said. They did not escalate beyond proportionality. Yes, an analyst replied carefully, but the duration of harm is unprecedented. The strategos dismissed the concern. They will protest loudly. They will strike a symbolic target. They will re-establish deterrence. The analyst did not respond. Privately, Dominion war simulations began including an updated parameter: human escalation uncertainty. The order did not come in a speech. It came as a distributed encrypted authorization across secure military networks. Classification: Omega threshold. Authorization cascade protocols activated dormant systems. Shipyards that had been maintained in reserve status transitioned to full production cycles. Autonomous combat swarms stored under deep ocean vaults were powered for the first time in decades. Ethics locks on certain strategic weapons required dual council confirmation. They received it. The Strategic Ethics Council's vote was unanimous. The justification document cited one line: existential moral violation confirmed. Human fleets did not converge dramatically. They repositioned incrementally. Task groups rotated under the guise of standard patrol replacement. Carrier groups conducted extended readiness exercises. Reconnaissance drones mapped Calrex hyperspace lanes with increased frequency. On the 3rd night after authorization, Unified Fleet Command transmitted a message to the Elendari Collective. It was brief. Restraint period concluded. The Elendari response was immediate. Clarify operational intent. Humanity replied, liability minimization. The Collective's analysts recognized the phrase. It was pulled directly from the shard. For the first time in their recorded history, the Elendari predictive matrix returned a probability curve that extended beyond stable modeling parameters. They issued a formal advisory to all member systems. Non-interference strongly recommended. Sector 47L was not heavily fortified. The Calrex cartel relied on obscurity more than brute defense,
But they did maintain perimeter arrays and minefields designed to discourage independent raids. At 0402 local system time, gravitational sensors detected anomalies, not ships, distortions, localized space-time shear events. Human fleets did not exit hyperspace conventionally. They unfolded into real space through synchronized micro-translations, distributing arrival vectors to avoid detection clustering. Autonomous interdiction drones deployed first. They disabled communications satellites within seconds. Electronic warfare platforms flooded the system with signal interference. Mining installations attempted emergency transmission. They were isolated before signals cleared the inner orbital boundary. Then the human fleet appeared fully. Battleships in triangular formation. Carrier platforms releasing strike wings in coordinated arcs. The cartel responded with scramble launches from hidden docks embedded inside asteroid belts. Their ships were agile, irregular, unpredictable. They were also outmatched. Human tactical AI predicted vector shifts 3 seconds ahead of execution. Gravitic shear cannons engaged. Cartel cruisers split along structural stress seams without explosive spectacle, simply separated, drifting inert. Precision kinetic lances disabled power cores without triggering atmospheric detonations inside inhabited structures. Within 14 hours, organized cartel resistance in Sector 47L ceased. But humanity did not withdraw. Instead, hospital ships translated into orbit. Boarding teams secured detention blocks. Human marines moved through corridors that still smelled of industrial lubricant and recycled air. They found mass grave chambers. They documented everything. Surviving human prisoners, those who remained, were evacuated. Non-human laborers enslaved alongside them were freed. Civilian sectors were stabilized. Then the fleet moved. The vast Dominion convened an emergency war council. Sector 47-L had been a peripheral cartel node. Its fall was not strategically catastrophic, but the method mattered. Human fleets had demonstrated capabilities not previously observed. Space-time shear deployment at that scale was considered ethically controversial. The Dominion had assumed humanity's internal moral frameworks would prevent use except under existential invasion. The strategos studied battle recordings. They exercised restraint, he observed. An aide hesitated. With respect, High Strategos, they dismantled the system entirely. Yes, the Strategos replied calmly, but they did not burn it. That distinction unsettled the chamber. Dominion doctrine respected annihilation. It feared precision. Precision implied control. Control implied scalability. A junior analyst presented an alarming projection. If human operations continue at this pace and scale, the Colrex cartel will collapse within 6 standard months. And then, asked the Strategos. The analyst paused. Then the galaxy will reassess humanity's deterrence ceiling. Silence followed. The Strategos finally issued a directive. Deploy reconnaissance assets. Observe. Do not engage. Privately, some Dominion commanders wondered whether they had misread humanity entirely.
The second Colrex system fell faster. The third offered heavier resistance. Cartel leaders attempted to rally allied clans, broadcasting calls for united retaliation. Some responded. They were intercepted mid-translation. Human interdiction fields had expanded. Entire armadas were frozen at hyperspace exit nodes, immobilized inside artificial gravitic wells. The message from Unified Command was consistent across systems. Combatants will be neutralized. Civilians will be spared. The galaxy watched in disbelief. This was not chaotic vengeance, it was structured dismantling. System by system, supply chains evaporated. Weapons depots imploded. Command hierarchies disintegrated. Human fleets left behind reconstruction teams as often as they left debris fields. The contradiction unsettled observers. They were capable of overwhelming destruction, yet they continued rebuilding even as they advanced. Elendari analysts updated their classification model. Humanity was no longer paradoxical. They were conditional absolutists. Mercy existed, but only within boundaries, and the boundary had been crossed.
The Calrex cartel had never truly been unified. It was a marketplace of predators, not a nation. Its cohesion depended on profit margins and mutual deterrence. When Sector 47L fell, cartel leadership dismissed it as an isolated loss. When 3 additional systems collapsed within 2 weeks, internal communications shifted tone. Encrypted channels filled with accusation. You exposed coordinates. You diverted defensive funds. You withheld fleet support. Profit-sharing algorithms began failing as entire mining outputs vanished. Smaller clans attempted to sever ties and disappear into fringe space. Human reconnaissance networks anticipated the maneuver. Escape corridors were quietly mapped weeks prior. When breakaway fleets attempted to scatter, they encountered interdiction fields that did not destroy them, they immobilized them. Human vessels emerged from micro-translations like silent verdicts. Cartel captains transmitted defiance, some transmitted pleas. The responses were uniform. Surrender, you will receive trial. A faction led by the cartel's high executor, Varix Tal, rejected surrender outright. Tal had built his authority on ruthlessness. He understood deterrence psychology. To yield now would signal weakness to every predator watching. Instead, he broadcast a rally call across pirate channels. Humanity bleeds like any prey. They posture, they moralize, strike their civilians, break their unity. It was a catastrophic miscalculation, because the unity was no longer fragile. It was solidified. Within the war chambers of the vast Dominion, strategic simulations ran continuously. Human fleet movements displayed alarming coordination. More troubling were energy signatures detected in several engagements, signatures corresponding to theoretical weapon systems the Dominion had long deemed too destabilizing for practical deployment. The Dominion High Strategos convened a restricted council. Assessment, he demanded. A senior weapons analyst projected a simulation. In 3 engagements, human forces utilized controlled stellar flux induction. A murmur spread across the chamber. Localized? The Strategos asked. Yes, extremely localized. They destabilized the outer layers of a red dwarf's magnetic field to disrupt orbital shipyards. No uncontrolled flare occurred. The Strategos leaned back. They manipulated a star without causing a superflare. Yes. Silence followed. The Dominion had theorized such capabilities. They had rejected them as too risky. Humanity had not only developed the technology, they had refined it. And casualties? The Strategos asked. Combatant losses only. Civilian habitats were evacuated prior to flux surge. Precision again. The Dominion faced a dilemma. If humanity eliminated the cartel entirely, a power vacuum would emerge. Dominion influence could expand into the void. But intervention risked confrontation with a species demonstrating escalating strategic dominance. The Strategos issued a cautious directive. Indirect observation continues. Any interference must be deniable. Privately, he updated his personal assessment. Humanity was not weak. Humanity was disciplined. And discipline combined with technological escalation was far more dangerous than rage. The 5th month of the campaign marked a turning point.
Cartel remnants consolidated in a heavily fortified system known as Draxel Prime. It was not a planet. It was an industrial hive, an artificial megastructure constructed around a gas giant's orbit. Shipyards wrapped the equatorial ring. Defense platforms formed a spherical lattice of overlapping kill zones. Millions of enslaved laborers were believed to be present. Unified Fleet Command classified the system as a complex ethical theater. Standard assault would risk catastrophic civilian loss. Prolonged siege would allow cartel leadership to scatter. The solution required a capability previously locked under Black Level designation. The Strategic Ethics Council reconvened. Authorization required unanimous consent. The proposal: Quantum Infrastructure Collapse. A weaponized algorithm designed to infiltrate integrated defense networks and induce cascading system paralysis without explosive force. If successful, Draxel Prime's military infrastructure would disassemble itself. If miscalculated, life support for millions could fail. The debate lasted 12 hours. In the end, the vote was unanimous. The threshold had been crossed long ago. This was not vengeance. It was termination of a predatory structure.
Human fleets did not immediately attack. Instead, they surrounded the system at extreme range. Electronic warfare units initiated signal infiltration attempts. Cartel countermeasures flared, attempting to purge intrusion vectors. The quantum infrastructure collapse algorithm activated. Defense satellites flickered. Docking clamps disengaged spontaneously. Weapon platforms rotated harmlessly away from target vectors. Internal AI routines turned against one another in recursive validation loops. Within 90 minutes, the megastructure's outer lattice was inert. Human boarding teams deployed under full environmental shield. Inside the corridors of Draxel Prime, resistance was fierce. Varix Tal had centralized his remaining loyalists. Cartel fighters knew this was the final stand. But they underestimated human preparation. Autonomous microdrones mapped corridors in real time. Marines advanced with surgical coordination. Non-combatant zones were flagged and sealed. Human soldiers moved past terrified civilians to engage only armed opposition. The fighting lasted 19 hours. When it ended, Varix Tal was alive, captured beneath the shattered command dais of the Central Operations Corps. He demanded immediate execution. The commanding human officer refused. "You will face trial." Tal laughed despite his restraints. "You think trial frightens me?" The officer replied evenly, "It is not for you." For the first time in galactic history, a pirate warlord stood trial before a multi-species tribunal. Proceedings were broadcast across open channels. The Elindari Collective insisted on oversight observers. The Dominion sent silent delegates. Evidence from the Shard was presented publicly. Execution logs, biometric confirmations, testimony from survivors of New Carthage. Tal attempted defiance. He argued predatory necessity. He claimed weakness invited exploitation. He insisted humanity had provoked consequence by appearing soft. The presiding human judge responded with measured calm. "Mercy is not weakness, it is restraint. You mistook restraint for incapacity." The verdict was inevitable. Crimes against sentient life on a systemic scale. Sentence: permanent confinement within a high-security null-field facility. Not execution, permanent accountability. The message was unmistakable. Humanity did not seek annihilation. They sought justice, but justice would be absolute. With Draxel Prime dismantled and leadership captured, the Colrex cartel ceased to function. Remaining factions attempted surrender. Some attempted flight. Human interdiction networks intercepted nearly all.
In system after system, the pattern repeated. Military infrastructure disabled, combatants detained, civilians liberated, reconstruction teams deployed. The campaign's pace slowed, not from resistance, but from humanitarian logistics. Human medical fleets now outnumbered combat vessels in former cartel space. Food synthesis arrays were installed, water purification systems restored. Local governance councils formed under temporary human advisory oversight. The galaxy struggled to interpret what it was witnessing. This was not conquest. This was systemic correction. The Elendari updated their classification once more. Humanity, conditional defensive hegemon. They projected a 78% probability that no major power would directly challenge humanity for the next 3 centuries. The Dominion revised their own doctrine quietly. New War College curricula included a single cautionary module: threshold events, case study, humanity. 6 months after the first strike, the last organized Calrex resistance cell transmitted surrender. Human fleets ceased offensive operations. They did not declare victory. They issued a statement instead. Primary objectives achieved. Reconstruction phase continues. Across Earth, memorial walls for New Carthage were updated. Names once listed as missing were reclassified, recovered, confirmed deceased, unaccounted for. Grief remained, but it was no longer unanswered. In the Grand Assembly Chamber of the Elendari Collective, delegates gathered for a final address from humanity's representative. The chamber was silent before the human even spoke, because every species present now understood something fundamental. Human mercy had been real. Human patience had been genuine. But mercy was not an obligation. It was a choice. And once revoked, the escalation was unstoppable.
War leaves scars, even when it is precise, even when it is justified, even when it is restrained. Former Calrex territories did not resemble battlefields. They resembled abandoned machinery, vast industrial systems stripped of predatory purpose. Human reconstruction fleets operated with the same efficiency as their warships. Medical frigates deployed atmospheric relief drones. Terraforming engineers recalibrated poisoned mining zones. Psychological recovery teams, human and alien alike, established trauma stabilization centers. The first schools reopened before the first permanent government buildings were completed. This detail did not go unnoticed by the Elendari collective observers embedded throughout the systems. Why prioritize education? One Elendari asked a human coordinator. The answer was immediate. Because fear spreads fastest in ignorance. Freed populations were not annexed. Instead, provisional councils were formed from local representatives. Human advisors offered support but refused permanent authority. The message was consistent. We dismantled predation. We are not here to replace it. Over time, something unexpected occurred. Formerly enslaved populations petitioned for trade agreements, not dependency. Humanity accepted, not as overlord, as partner. Within the strategic halls of the vast Dominion, the aftermath was studied obsessively. The Dominion had miscalculated. They had believed humanity's moral framework limited its willingness to escalate. Instead, that framework had structured escalation, a critical distinction. The High Strategos commissioned a full doctrinal rewrite. Predatory opportunism against humanity was reclassified as existential strategic error. Military academies introduced a new lecture module: Mercy Misinterpretation and Escalation Collapse. Junior officers studied the Calrex campaign in detail. They noted the precision, they noted the restraint,
They noted the terrifying speed once the threshold had been crossed. Privately, Dominion analysts admitted a difficult truth. If humanity ever perceived the Dominion as crossing a similar boundary, the outcome would not favor them. Diplomatic envoys were dispatched quietly to human space. Trade agreements were strengthened. Cultural exchanges expanded. The Dominion did not apologize, but it adjusted. In the language of empires, adjustment was admission enough.
On Earth, the grief did not vanish. Justice does not resurrect the dead, but it does close open wounds. Families of New Carthage gathered for a final global memorial broadcast. The recovered were honored. The lost were named. And for the first time in 2 years, the ceremony ended without uncertainty. Psychologists across human space recorded a measurable decrease in anxiety indices. The trauma bond that had unified humanity did not dissolve. It evolved into vigilance. Military budgets did not spike further. They stabilized at elevated levels. Humanity had learned something about itself. The threshold was real. It existed, but crossing it carried cost. Even justified escalation leaves residue. The Strategic Ethics Council convened one final session. A motion was introduced: reclassification of black-level authorizations to dormant status. The vote passed unanimously. Humanity did not wish to live perpetually at the edge of revocation. Mercy, once restored, was deliberately chosen again.
The grand chamber of the Alindari Collective had never been so full. Delegates from minor systems attended in person. Observers from distant clusters tuned in to live transmissions. When the human representative stepped forward, the chamber's ambient light dimmed instinctively. Not in intimidation, in focus. The representative did not project anger, nor triumph. Only gravity. "We are aware," the human began, "that many of you believed our restraint indicated weakness." A ripple of quiet acknowledgement passed through the chamber. "We are also aware that some believed our retaliation would be indiscriminate." Pause. "We have demonstrated otherwise." A holographic projection illuminated behind the speaker. Before and after imagery of Colrex systems. Destroyed war infrastructure. Rebuilt civilian sectors. "We do not celebrate destruction," the representative continued, "but we will not tolerate predation." A slight shift in tone. "Our compassion is authentic. Our mercy is real. Our patience is deliberate." The chamber remained silent. "But understand this clearly." The human's voice lowered, not louder, but sharper. "Mercy is not an obligation imposed upon us by your expectations. It is a decision we make." A beat. "And when that decision is revoked, we do not respond halfway." No applause followed. The silence was deeper than approval. It was understanding. The Alindari Collective updated humanity's classification one final time. Stable conditional power. High ethical cohesion. Extreme escalation potential when provoked. The galaxy recalibrated. Not in fear alone, but in respect.
Decades later, in military academies across dozens of species, the Colrex collapse was studied as foundational doctrine. The lesson was simple. Humanity will exhaust diplomacy. Humanity will pursue law. Humanity will offer peace repeatedly. But if you enslave their children, if you eradicate without remorse, if you mistake patience for incapacity, there is a line. And once crossed, there is nothing more dangerous in the universe than a species whose mercy was voluntary
and who chose to revoke it.